started late, so don't blame us if we go over time. There is also what we know as the African sense of time. So we may starve you a little bit before lunch. Let me start by thanking the Sharjah Art Foundation for the invitation to me and, of course, to Manthia. He's a star here, by the way. I'm just wrapping up the whole thing. And I want to thank specifically Hur, Al-Qasimi, Reem, Shadid, Batul, Ryan, and of course Najiba and Humaid for everything that they've done to make this invitation possible and to make it always, as I experience it, as pleasant as possible. So what I want to start with is just to give you a sense of the structure of how we're going to proceed. Of course, as I would like to remind you, it's Manthia who is the star of the show here, and it's important for me just to acknowledge that. So my role will be basically to introduce Manthia and to enter into a dialogue with him, and so he can at least lead the conversation. So we'll start. I thought you've read the biography of Manthia and you have enough information about him. But what I'm interested in is actually his intellectual biography. He happened to have written two very important books that actually reflect on his own journey in an intellectual sense. One is called In Search of Africa, and the other one is called We Won't Budge. In Search of Africa is actually an intellectual biography of the continent itself, but We Won't Budge is actually more of a personal journey, almost like more autobiographical than In Search of Africa. It traces his own journey as a young man in Mali, moving to Paris and then to the United States, and becoming, of course, a professor and intellectual within the context of the United States. So we'll cover that part of the biography, reflecting on those two books. But I'm also more interested in his work because of that he started actually as a scholar, as a theorist. But soon he started engaging the documentary as a source of, or as a sort of praxis. So it's interesting that he's a specialist in African cinema, and he's actually one of the pioneer scholars in the United States. He's the one to look up to if you want to design a course. His book, African Cinema, Politics and Culture, and to the latest one that is called New African Cinema. These are basic texts in anybody who wants to really teach or study African cinema. So we'll cover that part, his engagement, but more interested in the fact that throughout his work, that is the scholarly, the autobiographical, and also the shift to the documentary, and he has been very leading. What really cuts through all of these different genres that he was engaged in is his interest in the Black intellectual tradition. And that is an important emphasis, and for me, it's important to look at, and also in the context or in relationship to our location too, is that what is it interesting about the Black radical tradition in the context of the Arab world and in the context of the Gulf? Of course, many people think of Africa as remote and is separated with the Red Sea, but Africa is not really in the backyard of the Arab world. For several reasons. Africa actually is in the front yard. If you just listen yesterday to the music that Wael Shoghi was using and the musicians themselves, you will notice the link to Africa immediately, either by the presence of people of a darker skin or the music style itself and the engagement. You can definitely relate it to the Sufi traditions in West Africa or in Sudan or Ethiopia. And the rhythm and all of those things are there. And that is by the fact of history, either it's through the slave trade or migrations of people, which continue, of course, up till today. The relevance of the Black tradition, I'll get through some moment that I thought is very important. But I want to say there's something that is happening now in the world. There's a sort of an amnesia about the link between Africa and the Arab world. First of all, the Arab world itself geographically extends into Africa. Half of the Arab world exists within the continent that we know as Africa. But I'm not just only interested in the geographic or ethnic, composition of the African continent vis-a-vis the Arab world. I'm interested in reclaiming the progressive politics of solidarity of the 1960s, especially in the 1950s, especially in the era of decolonization. And this becomes very important in the triumph of the market, the new liberal economy, and the celebration of new liberal ideals. And that's actually very visible in the art world, the whole idea of the market and the art fairs and so forth. That it becomes the intellectual forums that I really personally detest. So I wanted us just to briefly, because of Manthya's engagement in the Black radical tradition, is just as a reminder to go through moments of solidarity in which the intersection between Pan-Arabism and Pan-Africanism in the context of decolonization was very important. So Batul, I'll start with this. I wanted to point that Frantz Fanon, as a very important figure in the tradition of the Black radical thought, actually all his theorizing started in the context of an Arab country, of Algeria. He here, like in this photograph, which is very important for me because he represented Algeria as an ambassador of the FLN in Ghana soon after the independence of Ghana under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah. He was there in a mission to actually convince several of the sub-Saharan Africans to enter into solidarity with the Algerian struggle. So that is one moment of that kind of solidarity, that moment of the intersection of the Black subject, the Black intellectual tradition with the Pan-Arabism. And next is something that is, Mandela recently has been presented as this Dover peace and a kind of a Dion of nonviolence. Nelson Mandela was actually in the early 60s, was seeking military training. So he was, at that time, was convinced that the armed struggle was very important. It's Algeria that provided the training. He visited Algeria after 1992, after his release from prison, and his election as a president. The first country he visited was Algeria. And he wrote this in his biography or autobiography, and he said, Algeria made a man of me. Don't mind the patriarchy here in the word man, but I think what he meant is that engagement with the armed struggle and the early training, which showed his seriousness about thinking in that kind of way. So he's not as presented after his death. Next, that's another moment in Algeria, and then next, another moment in Algeria, and that's in 1962, and if you read his biography, you will see more. Next. Here's another moment of the intersection of Pan-Arabism and Pan-Africanism. Nkrumah and Abdel Nasser, and that's very important, let alone the personal relationship of Nkrumah marrying an Egyptian, Fathia Nkrumah, and having a son, Jamal Nkrumah, who's now in Cairo, one of the most prominent journalists in the Ahram Weekly. Next. Malcolm X in Egypt, Malcolm X in Saudi Arabia for Hajj, Malcolm X touring the Arab world, and it was actually an important moment in that intersection between the Black radical tradition and Pan-Arabism, where after those visits, there was a major shift in the politics of Malcolm X himself in terms of moving from beyond the Black subject, thinking globally, thinking internationally, and that's when his life was cut short. Next. There are also moments of solidarity. The Lotus magazine, some of you would know about it, is the organ and the official journal of the Organization of the Solidarity of Afro-Asian Writers. And it was part of the larger solidarity of that larger politics or axis of solidarity at that time. And it started in Cairo, moved to Beirut, headed by a Pakistani, but most of if you look through the issues, you'll find Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, all of those African writers actually contributed to it. These are the moments that are forgotten and now being actually recovered. Next. And then tricontinental. Some of you may remember that in 1966, Cuba, after its independence, or after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, there was a conference organized in Havana. And the conference is very important on several levels. But more relevant to us here today is that the main organizer was actually Mahdi Ben Barka of this conference. And he was actually assassinated probably a month before he started, because he organized the whole conference, of course, with other intellectuals, but he was the main person behind it. For those of you who are Moroccan, know the disappearance of Mahdi Ben Baraka. We know the link between the French intelligence service and the Moroccan one in his disappearance. And in that conference, major intellectuals today that we can talk about in terms of the theorizing decolonization, post-colonial, and so forth, condition and so forth, including Cabral, were in that conference. And that is happened there, and the organization that is called OSPAL, Organization for the People, for the Solidarity of the People of African, Asia, and Latin America, organized this, had this journal, which was actually being issued for a long time. It's called Tricontinental. I chose this cover specifically because it highlights the solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Next. And during the Black Panther era, the Black Panthers sought refuge in Algiers, and the role is very important. You know, if you've seen the film by William Klein on the Panthers, or if you know about the, Eldridge Cleavers and others, the Black Panthers were in clear solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Here's Huey Newton, Elaine Brown, leading figures in the Black Panther, greeting Yasser Arafat. Next. And of course, if you move to the present, Black Lives Matter, I thought it's important that the link between Black Lives Matter and the Palestinian cause, and the exchange between the activists in both different continents or across continent, is very important in rethinking the importance, actually for me, of reclaiming that progressive politics of the 1960s. Because what you see today is the worst stereotype of the Africans all over the globe, and including actually the Arab world, where sometimes you find that the worst stereotypes about the black body or the black subject has been internalized. But it's also from the other side too, where the Arab also becomes, all the Orientalist tropes of representation of Arabs became prevalent in the context of Africa itself and in the view of that. So as we actually reflect on this, I find it very important, especially in the context of the return of colonial violence with vengeance in this region. Syria, Iraq, and of course Palestine, and lately Yemen. You could see how how it is important to actually reclaim that politics of the 1960s as a reminder of countering this kind of rising colonial violence and internalizing of the worst stereotypes about each other, the black subject or the Arab subject. And in fact, one of the things that I used to joke about in the United States in post-September 11, as a Sudanese who straddle both, we are at the margin of the Arab world, but we were also at the margin of the African world, is that after September 11, Arab became the new black. It's not orange, the new black, but it is the Arab, the new black. So having said this, I think we should turn into one of the first questions that I want to start with Manthia next, is thinking biographically or thinking autobiographically. Manthia, you published, and I thought that would be the best way for you to introduce yourself beyond the biography that is published in the booklet about the March meeting, which is you've written In Search of Africa, next, the tool, and We Won't Budge. It would be interesting to reflect on both books, and in that sense, we can get an idea about your own intellectual development and evolution and the different interests that you straddle.
Thank you very much, Salah Hassan, who's been my friend for I don't know how long now. I don't care to remember. Let's put it that way. I'd like to also thank the Sharjah Art Foundation for inviting me. I'm really grateful and humbled by this invitation. It's my first time here, and I've met so many of you, and I'm in this world that I have not seen before. Closest probably would have been someplace like Athens, Greece. So I'm very happy to be here, and that's genuine. And thank you also second time for this introduction and the links between the Arab world, the Black world, Africa, Middle East, the Gulf, for really succinctly presenting that. Thank you very much. In my area of Africa, we take this for granted. for one. I'm from Mali, and many of you know that if something happened in Libya, it automatically happens in Mali. So I don't want to bring that up. Being from Mali also means that we have the largest frontier with Algeria, and we have Morocco and Mali, you know, the whole Timbuktu, the salt trade, the Tijania is something very common, Mauritania and Tunisia. So culturally, really, we take it for granted for the relations between the Arab world and the African world. For one thing, because Islam was the modernizing force, the first modernizing force for us, and that started 6th century already. You know, if we look at Kumbi Saleh, we look at Ouagadougou, and so on. The first modernizing, by modernizing, the first movement to bring people together beyond the ethnicity, beyond tribe. So in that sense, in my area, we really take that for granted. It's not new. And then in my other area, the United States, black culture is another modernizing force in the Arab world. It's not just in Europe. In many ways, if you look at the youth, and the youth need the urgency for the youth to name itself, to be present. African American call it representing, you know, to really be present. In the world today, it's the African American culture that developed it. And so when you see Arab rappers, it's not just in the Francophone world, but probably in Sharjah here, African American play a big role in that, and it's a political role. It's a political role against the Western philosophy of transcendence, of writing, and therefore of excluding orality, excluding all the cultures that do not write, where writing becomes the real text. So African American, from the people he just showed us to the young people, they challenge that culture. And I think history also is on their side in the sense that today orality easily has, first writing had conquered orality. The oral traditions were all silenced because we communicate through writing. But today with the medias, the television, the sound systems, writing has become esoteric or banalized through television also. But orality has taken its proper place, and African Americans are at the cutting edge of that. So In Search of Africa was very important to me because this may sound to you very, I don't know, obscure, very American. I'm coming from a tradition in which, in order to, first you find a job. You write a PhD, you find a job, and then you express yourself in a scholarly manner to get tenure. So it's the tenure part that's very weird, you know. So you have to publish articles in referee journals. And in that process, a Malian through France to the United States, I found myself silenced. Just forget about yourself, your identity, just write scholarly articles. And I received tenure, I became full professor. So I said, but where is this urgency for me to have a voice, to test the Derrida that I'm reading, to test the Foucault that I'm reading, the Aristotle? Where am I? Where is my position? So that's really where I began to use these first-person narratives in my work, because I have tenure. I'm not recommending this to any junior faculty here. I can say what I want to say, and therefore, I use this African-American influence in the black world. I say, here I am, and there is this theory, and this is how I enter this theory, and this is where I don't follow this theory. And of course, people who taught us to do that, Salah had already named them. You know, it's Frantz Fanon, it's Sam Ben Ousmane, it's Nasser, it's the 1969 PANAF meeting in Algiers. This is so important because, of course, 1966, we had the meeting, or they had the meeting in Dakar with Negritude. And the Pan-African world, the Arab world, they began to say Negritude is only based on the black skin. How do we do a revolutionary movement again against this Western urge to discover, to conquer, and to colonize? Where are, where is our voice? So 69 in Algeria was huge in that sense, but he already summarized for that. So In Search of Africa is really that attempt to not only find my own voice, but to link my voice to the other people's voices in this world where my presence counts.
And you won't budge? Because that is, of course, taken as title.
Right. Yeah. The title is from a musician from Mali called Salif Keita, who is a very interesting figure. He's an albino musician, and his last name is Keita, which means that he's from the Mali Empire. He's supposed to be a king or from monarchy, so he's not supposed to speak in front of a public. The griot is supposed to do the speaking for him. And Salif Keita became a musician to the big shame of his family. You know, how could you stand in front of people and sing just like a vulgar person? You know, so which I'm doing here, I'm not supposed to be doing. So Salif became this musician, and then very international because his voice is incredible. Many of you know him already. And then he sang this song called Nous pas bouger, We Won't Budge, against immigration, basically, where French people, Europeans come to Africa, they come to the Arab world, but they won't let African go to Europe. So Salif sang this it was a national anthem for immigrants. If he sang We Won't Budge at Carnegie Hall in New York, Irving Plaza, in Paris, Olympia, all the immigrants began to dance, Nous pas bouger, and then it was a great song, it was a great anthem, not a great song, because Salif had great songs, let's put it that way. So that's Salif Keita, and the way I went to France, and this is, again, something that people do not understand. They think that it's misery that drives everybody to Europe, to America, to all these places. It's rock and roll that took me to France. You talk about the 60s. I was in a world where I felt equal to Mick Jagger, to all these people. So Johnny Hallyday, Sylvie Vartan. So I wanted to be in that world, and all I did was go to the embassy, not the embassy, the security office in Mali, get a laissez-passer, and went to France. And then when I was going to America, I went to the US Embassy. What are you going to do there? I'm going there to study. Who's going to pay for your studies? My father. Now, my father did not make $2,000 a whole year, but they stamped my passport right away, and I went to the United States. Now, this book is a book of guilt. When I see people who are smarter than I am today, who are much better looking, who really deserve a chance in this world, and they're dying on the sea. So I began to look at myself again. Who am I? What am I doing? Life was so easy, rock and roll, and all these things. The book is full of music. So, because we organized Woodstock in Bamako in 1971. I'm from that generation. If you've seen Malik Sidibe's photographs and so on, that's my generation. And suddenly, this world has become what it is today. So the book is coming from that tradition. Yeah.
What we're going to move to, or shift to, is your own engagement with praxis. Meaning shift, in an intellectual way, but it's engaging in the documentary genre. And I think one of your earlier one, and Batul, if you can just play the clip from, we're going to show small clips from the different, and I thought it's very important for you to see the work of Manthia from his early beginning. He has a film that is called Rouge in Reverse, and some of you may know the work of Jean Rouge. He's one of the early French, filmmakers, documentary, known for two intersecting things, the documentary genre, that is the ethnographic documentary in Africa. Of course, that was facilitated for him by the French. Yeah, facilitated for him by the French colonial system as part of the French Empire in Africa. But it's also, there's something intriguing about this, because it is about, at that time when the film was made, 1998, 1996, that's the era of the return, the reflexive anthropology or reflective anthropology or reverse anthropology, or what came to be known in post-colonial studies in terms of reversing the gaze or returning the gaze. So we're going to show the clip, just very short, and then Manthia would probably comment more on the film itself. So you start.
Okay. It's very fantastic because you are there, and when I mix a film, it's a part of editing.
Rouge makes low-budget films which also become the subject of his anthropological classes at the university. He is free to make the films he wants to make because he has his own camera, editing, and mixing rooms.
You see, for me, editing is a very important part in the realization of this kind of film. I said very often that with a new camera, with a viewfinder, when I'm shooting, I am my first spectator. Sometimes I think I'm sitting in a big theater and I discover the film that I'm creating at the same time. And what's important, I'm the first spectator, and the second spectator is the editor, because she can see only what is on the screen. Right. Then she is the second one. Then, when we are editing a film, there is a permanent and very fertile contest between the editor and the filmmaker. Of course, the filmmaker is always in love with his image. And when she cut an image, she said, then keep it with you, you can keep it with you. And then say, ah, something is okay.
Moi, personnellement, je ne me marierai pas avec un noir.
Pourquoi?
Pour les enfants. Non, pas du tout. Pas du tout.
I first saw Jean Rouge and Edgar Morin's Chronique d'un été as a film student. It was enthusiastically received as a classic of cinema verite, capturing a new truth about Paris in 1960. Rouge's good friend Richard Leacock, another pioneer of cinema verite, explains.
We had a very strict set of rules that we stuck to. The first rule was never make an interview. All those films of Kennedy, Eddie Sachs, no interviews. Because we thought that the interview was the death of films. Then we had another stupid rule. Never ask anybody to do anything. Never tell them where to sit, what to wear. We never used the light. We never put a light on. There was a very, very strict set of rules, and we stuck with them.
Monsieur, s'il vous plaît, êtes-vous heureux? Il m'a dit qu'est-ce que ça peut vous foutre? S'il vous plaît.
I guess that gives us enough,
Yeah.
for you to reflect on.
Yeah, in many ways, this is all the more ironic now because Rouge died, and they are celebrating all over the world his centenary. And it's ironic, Rouge's whole reputation came from making films on the Dogon people, the Niger people. And Rouge was my professor. So what interested me was to basically, because Rouge's laboratory encouraged this, to return the gaze, to look at Rouge. He became an anthropological figure. Because Samben Ousmane had said about Jean Rouge's films that what troubles me is that Jean Rouge looks at us like insects. He's an entomologist. You know, you don't know where people are coming, they just come in front of the camera, they are like insects. And Rouge, of course, defended himself against this attack. So when I made this film on Rouge, ironically, Rouge told me he liked the film, but his problem was that I did not use plan séquence. You know, this is new wave tradition, French cinema tradition, where he just leave the camera, define the space, and whatever is in front of, in the space in front of the camera. You don't cut. Whereas my film is fast, goes from scene to scene. But the schools of anthropology, Rouge's students, they hated my film because they felt like, I was ungrateful. How could this man who never let anybody make a film on him when he was alive? All the Rouge films that you see today are films after he died. They went to archives. So this man gave you the permission to make a film on him, and you challenge his authority. How dare you do that? So I was completely excluded from these Rouge schools, and so now everybody is inviting me to go to the Rouge centenaries. As a bad African, I refuse to go to all of them. So, since you have your Rouge, I have my Rouge, let's leave it like that. Because I was in a situation, Africans hated me for giving voice to Rouge in my film, because African filmmakers hated Rouge. And I'm not saying this lightly, Suleiman Cissé, Idrissa Ouedraogo, Samben Ousmane, they all just say he is a paternalist. And the anthropologists loved Rouge, and French cinema film students in this room love Rouge. You can't touch Rouge. And I made the film on Rouge, so everybody hated me. So in many ways, that's the story of that film. But the idea was to say Africans need to look at Europeans. The gaze should go in both ways. That's what I was trying to do.
We're going to make a shift, actually, to one of your latest film, The Negritude, although it is one of your most recent films, but historically, the phenomenon of the negritude itself is very interesting, but it's also an earlier moment from the 1940s, 50s, and so forth. So some of you don't know it. It's a movement that was very Pan-African, basically ushered or pioneered by Léopold Sédar Senghor and Aimé Césaire. And of course, there is a difference, and Damas, Léon Damas. And there is a difference, of course, between the negritude of Aimé Césaire and the negritude of Senghor. Senghor ended up being a president of Senegal, and so he had the chance to actually use negritude as a manifesto for cultural renaissance in the context of Senegal, and more specifically in initiating the 1966 that you mentioned,
right,
the World Negro Festival,
right,
the first one. So we're going to see, just short clip from that, and then we're going to discuss this. Because one thing about the film, and that will be my main question to you, Manthia, is that it's a dialogue between Soyinka, Wole Soyinka, and Senghor.
Right.
Wole Soyinka is still alive, Senghor died.
Right.
So it's about two figures that one has the advantage of living long after to revise his views, and one has no chance. So let's see.
So it is streaming. I don't know if it's gonna, maybe you should turn this off and put it on again and put the password. I don't know. But the reason why I made this film is an imaginary dialogue. It's an imaginary dialogue between negritude and the young generation. The young generation, in this case, is Fanon, who did not like negritude for the reason that negritude fixed blackness as a biological identity as opposed to cultural identity in many ways. Samben Ousmane did not like negritude. He said the urgency in Africa was to feed people, not to talk about our ancestors and how great they were. Wole Soyinka was very famous for coining an expression called the tiger.
Ivoirité. They are not Ivorians. What exactly does that mean? What were they before? A large population of Ivory Coast is, as everybody knows, from Burkina Faso.
Yeah, it should be really good.
And so how is it possible for us to accept?
A little more. Yeah, maybe there, I don't know. Yeah, let's see.
to have what I call a xenophobic attitude being implanted into government policies is for me a very short-sighted policy. And it's one which does not take into account the history of the countries from which these migrants are coming. What was the relationship of those countries to the countries into which they're going? Why are Somali flooding into Italy? Why do Nigerians flock into Britain and elsewhere? Why do the Senegalese, why are they found on the streets of Paris and of course in Italy as well, vending goods and so on? I think the European countries have got to realize that the borders are porous and humanity is mobile, and adopt policies which take cognition of that fact, and that there's something called restitution. I'm not going to use the word reparations because that's problematic. There's something called restitution, and they should look at this influx of migrants as some kind of restitution and provide for these migrants.
Okay, I think we can stop there. Yeah. Because I was saying Soyinka is known for saying that the tiger does not proclaim its tigritude. It jumps on its prey and eats it. Why are black people dancing about their negritude? So this was very famous in the 60s, 70s. And my generation basically refused to read negritude because Fanon said it was bad, Samben Usman said it was bad, Soyinka said it was bad. So we read Wretched of the Earth, we read radical books. And it was only around 2000 when I became friends with Edouard Glissant that I reconciled myself with Senghor. And I began to read Senghor and realized that, of course, there were exaggerations in his concept of negritude, but there were also some crucial elements that made negritude necessary. I was telling you about Western universal philosophy silencing oral traditions, but it's not just oral traditions, religious practices, people's lived experiences. All these were silenced in Western, in Africa, in the Arab world. So how do we give voice to these elements? And negritude was very important in that sense. And this is why, because of time, I won't go too much into it, but I said to people, and very recently, that Fanon taught me how to think. But this thinking, which was leading us to the necessary construction of the nation state, because Fanon and Césaire say there is no culture but national culture. It was a veiled critique of negritude, basically. Forget about your ancestors. Take your weapons, build a nation, and as you build your nation, you are building your culture. This is Fanon, Césaire. So they taught me how to think. Then I said, but Edouard Glissant liberated me because he took me out of this mode of just nation building to another mode, to a liberated identity where I could multiply my identities in many ways. And so the return to negritude was very important for me in that sense.
I'm just going to play the beginning, like just one okay. minute maybe, and I thought it very important for the audience just to get a sense of the beginnings of the project itself, like, Senghor is speaking, but it's also the young Wole Soyinka speaking.
Okay.
Monsieur le Président, alors un autre mot qu'on retrouve très souvent sous votre plume, mais qui est très péjoratif en France, c'est le mot nègre. Alors.
Mais je suis sénégalais. Et déjà, le 15 avril 1789, dans leur très humble doléance et remontrance des habitants du Sénégal au peuple français tenant les états généraux, les bourgeois de la ville de Saint-Louis se proclamaient nègres et français. Nous disons aujourd'hui nègre et francophone. Je sais bien que c'était un mot de mépris, et de ce mot de mépris, nous avons fait notre drapeau.
Every scholar must select his constituency. Every scholar and every individual, every citizen, every thinking being must select his constituency. I confess myself that I do not consider my shoulders broad enough to assume the entire burdens of the whole world, to assume the position of champion of all the oppressed peoples of the world. No, I have realized that I do not feel strong enough for that. I have therefore selected my constituency. It is a Bibima, the world of the black peoples. No.
Stop and then go to the next one. Okay, we're going to move forward, although you produced in between many films, including Conakry, Sigi Khan, but we cannot cover all those. And the one you've done with Dan Glover,
Right.
going back into Mali and those places. We shift to Glisson, because I think one thing that I would like to credit Manthia with, and I think the Glisson has been part of the 1956 conference, 1959, 56, the first Pan-African Congress of Black Writers, and then also in which all these characters that you know today, Langston, James Baldwin, Richard Wright, M.S. Césaire, Frantz Fanon, all of them were young men in their 20s. One has to remember that Fanon wrote his book, his first book, at the age of 23, which became the most important book probably in liberation, in the literature of liberation of black radical tradition, that is Black Skin, White Mask. So Glisson, interestingly, I've studied in the United States from the mid-80s on. We've never heard about Edouard Glisson. We know there is a name there, but it was and that's very interesting thing about living in the United States, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it has this advantage of having post-colonial studies and so forth, and encouraging, these kind of studies, but it's only through translation that there will be major shifts. And I think the introduction of Glisson's ideas, while they existed in translation, it was through your film that there is a whole kind of increase or gross interest in Glisson and the major ideas that he espoused, whether it is creolization, tout monde, and the poetics of relation, as everybody now celebrate that. So we will see this segment. I think it's focusing on opacity, which is the right to be,
C'est incroyable. Oui.
On se servit de l'eau chaude pour le nettoyer.
Il va y avoir que ce goût spécial est lié parce que tu le fumes.
Et il le fume, oui.
C'est ça.
Il y a 40 ans, à Mexico, dans une conférence avec Octavio Paz, j'avais dit « Je réclame le droit à l'opacité ». Il y a une injustice fondamentale à ce que la projection de la transparence des pensées occidentales se répande sur le monde entier. Mais pourquoi? Pourquoi devons-nous estimer les gens au barème, selon le barème de la transparence des idées qui a été proposé par l'Occident? Je comprends ceci, je comprends cela, je comprends ceci, je comprends la rationalité. Et je dis, mais quelqu'un a le droit d'être opaque à mes yeux. Ça ne va pas m'empêcher de l'aimer, de travailler avec la personne, de la fréquenter, etc. Et le raciste, c'est celui qui refuse ce qu'il ne comprend pas. Je peux accepter ce que je ne comprends pas. Et l'opacité, c'est un droit que nous devons avoir. Et toute la salle a dit, mais qu'est-ce que c'est que cette barbarie? Alors, on ne comprend... il faut comprendre. Si on ne comprend pas, qu'est-ce que c'est, etc., etc. Et je vous assure que 20 ans après, ou 30 ans après, dans la même salle, dans la même ville, il y a eu une réunion, une conférence, et tout à fait plaisamment, j'ai rappelé ce que j'avais dit 20 ans avant ou 30 ans avant, et tous les gens dans la salle ont dit « Ah non, il faut réclamer à l'ONU le droit à l'opacité. » Pourquoi? Parce que les gens avaient fini par comprendre que c'était une barbarie. La barbarie, c'était justement d'imposer à l'autre sa propre transparence. Et moi, je dis toujours aux psychiatres, aux psychanalystes, si je n'accepte pas ma propre opacité pour moi-même, effectivement, je me défais. Mais je peux accepter ma propre opacité, dire, je sais pas pourquoi, je déteste cette personne ou j'aime cette personne, mais je l'aime. Je sais pas pourquoi. Pourquoi? Il n'y a aucune raison, il n'y a aucune qualité, il n'y a aucune... Mais je sais. Est-ce qu'on sait pourquoi on déteste le chou-fleur ou le... Est-ce qu'on sait pourquoi? Est-ce qu'on comprend pourquoi on déteste le... Moi, je déteste cette plante verte, là, un petit légume vert, là, le brocoli. Tout le monde aime le brocoli. Je déteste le brocoli. Mais est-ce que je sais pourquoi? Pas du tout. J'accepte mon opacité sur ce plan-là. Pourquoi je ne l'accepterais pas sur d'autres plans? Et pourquoi je n'accepterais pas l'opacité de l'autre? Pourquoi je dois obligatoirement comprendre l'autre pour vivre à côté de lui, travailler avec lui, etc. C'est absolument... Et c'est une des lois de la relation. Parce que dans la relation, les éléments ne se confondent pas comme ça, ne se perdent pas comme ça. Chaque élément peut garder son, je ne dirais pas seulement son autonomie, mais son essentialité, n'est-ce pas, tout en s'accommodant des essentialités et des différences des autres. Eh bien, en 30 ans, les gens avaient compris ça.
Okay, it's your chance to reflect on this opacity.
In many ways, Glissant is talking about philosophies here that are very easy in French from high school on, but difficult for me to translate, or for many people to translate into English. This whole notion, first, of the same and the other. And, Europe defining the whole world in terms of the same. You are like me or you don't exist. The whole Caliban and Prospero from Shakespeare on down, So this definition of the same and the other element is very easy in French again, être étant, to be and to become. And to Glissant, the most important thing about life is not to be, it's to become. And you become through your relation with the other. So whereas Western philosophy was banging me in the head about, essentialism, about difference as alterity, something that you can never attain, and difference as the new novel from Robbe-Grillet on, 1959 on, where the novel is no longer supposed to signify. The novel is supposed to really discuss its own intransitivity. Again, maybe my translations are not very right in English. That is, the novel is not supposed to speak. Art does this too. Avant-garde art does all this. Where the mirror, and if you read Deleuze's Cinema 1 and 2, you will see this. The mirror of cinema is no longer reflecting reality, which I'm not looking for here, but the mirror of cinema reflects another cinema. It's not looking at you. It doesn't care about you. And that's, I mean, Tarantino is the most vulgar aspect of that. But that's really the definition of the French New Wave. And it's that cinema today that define what cinema is. We forgot. So these notions are very solid in European philosophy. And Glissant is actually saying we need, and this notion also give us rationality, they give us systematicity, they give us transparency. Whereas Glissant is saying opacity, where difference in this case become actually the most important element. It's no longer something you can speak for the other, you can do this, but without difference, the world is gonna die. Because the same cannot go on reproducing itself, it's gonna kill itself. You know, whether the same is the African same, or the European same, or the Arab same. Without the other, without the difference with another object, and these objects are not always visible objects. They're not always human being. They could be a tree, they could be the water, they could be the fire. You know, the famous statement in Négritude again, écoute plus souvent les choses que les êtres, la voix du feu s'entend, entend la voix de l'eau. You know, listen more often to things than to people, because the voice of fire can be heard, the voice of water can be heard. So Glissant takes his idea of la pensée de tremblement, the wakeful thinking from that system of thought that polytheist cultures have, that monotheist cultures do not have. You know, polytheist cultures, they can depend on 3, 4, 5 gods. If this doesn't work, maybe this would work, and so on. So listening to that really helped Glissant to theorize opacity, because you begin to believe in many things, some you see, some you don't see, but you tremble with the trembling with the world. And this is why Palestine became very important to people. How do you tremble with the trembling of Palestinians or Syrians or Malians? How do you do that? And in many ways, we don't tremble. You know, the closing of the short clip on Elian, the Syrian film. We just watch it on television, million TV screens. We don't tremble. It's become a televisual spectacle. I don't know if you remember the clip that was shown before our panel. So Glissant is teaching us to learn again how to tremble. This trembling is very, you know, la pensée du tremblement, or quaking, or frémissement, you know. So that's what's happening here.
Okay, well, that's actually a great segue to discuss the last segment. Okay. I know many of you are hungry and aching to go and eat. But it's important, because it's really about this takes us to the segue of what I call the new middle passage, which is about immigration. And of course, when you remind us of the Syrian crisis and so forth, we always remember the Syrian refugee. Although prior to that, there were all these Africans from sub-Saharan Africa crossing the boundaries and so forth. So if you can show the segment from the last one, Opera of the World. This would be a segment from the last or the latest Manches project, which was produced in collaboration with Documenta, Prince Claus Fund, and of course also the, I think the Goethe Institute. The German television, yeah. So it's a co-production, and many people in this room, including Fariba, worked very hard behind the scene on that. But what is important about this, and I think maybe I just leave it for you to reflect on, is this kind of the new migration. And in the context of an opera that was actually produced by Prince Claus Fund years ago, but never really materialized. And Manche happened to be the person who filmed it and used that within the editing of the final product, which is really based on what's happening today. So go ahead.
Into exile and no homelessness,
a scene from the unfinished opera itself, as it was staged.
The grandmother of my grandmother, yeah, came from France as a Huguenot, yeah, and as a Huguenot very late during the French Revolution, persecuted, and came to Germany, yeah, and married there, yes, see, and I would not sit before you, yeah, if she not had fled, yeah, and these Huguenots, yeah, they brought Germany, yeah, 50 years in progress, yeah. I see the people coming from Hungary to Europe, from Syria, from Africa. Then I think that the Hungarians themselves, they came in 1956, yeah, and today, yeah, some of them are in Stanford, in Harvard, yeah, on best places as academics, you see, yeah. You could never say a foreigner can bring luck, yeah, or bring difficulties. You don't know.
Beaucoup sont passés par Marseille. Ils font partie de tous ces intellectuels et artistes.
So maybe we should stop here, unless, no, maybe we should, because of time, let's stop by summarize it.
Yeah, okay.
Basically, this is the exile of the emigration of European intellectuals from Europe after World War II, which culminated in the suicide of Walter Benjamin. That's the sequence here. And the point I wanted to make in the film is that immigration has always been there from the beginning of the world, and that, we are focusing on the elements of immigration today because they have become politicized in order to downplay the significance of hospitality. Europe closes the doors, America wants to build walls, and therefore we see immigration just as immigration of people from shithole countries, as Trump would put it. So again, so the film shows the immigration of European to America, European to Africa, Syrian to Europe, African to Europe, or to other places, where the whole world has always been moving. And my whole point in this film is that I can tell you my story, and from my story, you can hear your story, and from your story, I can see my story. So how these stories are really imbricated, included in each other. And again, we go back to Glissant. Glissant says that I'd rather be the person attempting to cross the border than the person guarding the border. Because the person crossing the border is full of imagination, is full of dreams, is full of ideas to make this world better, not only for himself, but changing the world. Every place in this world where there is change is based on movement, mobility of people. So Glissant said he'd rather be that, whereas the person guarding the wall, Donald Trump on down, they have no imagination for the future. They're stuck. So the future doesn't belong to them, and no matter what they do, people will pass anyway. So that's really the argument of the film here, and it's a Glissantian argument.
Okay, on this optimist note, we end here, but thank you really, Manthia,
thank
for
you.
Kind of a feast.
Thank you. Please stop. I want to thank Salah. I want to thank Salah because he knows how to make me look good. He chose these clips. So thank you. I didn't do any effort here. So.
I just want to say a shout out for you, Batul. Thank you so much for your patience. Okay.